Hitchcock. It's a famous line out of Hitchcock movie, that question. You must not go to the movie.
I guess not enough.
It's like 39 points, or
The 54 marks.
the 47 miseries.
Right. Oh, good. Closer is good.
We're getting cozy.
Good. You need that. Oh, nasty winter. Oh, we have a good recidivism rate.
Nobody's downstairs. So.
People coming back. That's good.
Check the box for questions.
No, I didn't. Should I? Did anybody put a box in a question in the basket?
Apparently not.
Okay. Well, as we say, it is your turn.
Can you move the mic closer?
Oh, yeah. I could move closer to the mic is another way. I was afraid to be too close. Okay, how's that? Better? No. It's like me.
It rotates. It has to be straight up or more.
Whoa, there it really is. All right, nobody will fall asleep. It'll go, bah. Well, does anybody think they have Buddha nature? Are you skeptical? Bill does.
I was listening to teachings from the Moonlam today, Gyaltsab Rinpoche, and one of the things that he talked about was everything being an illusion. You know, the 7-point mind training aphorism, be a child of illusion, or and so he talked about that for a while, and it was really wonderful about, you know, the illusory nature of reality, of the body, of, you know, thought, of phenomena, and given that nature of reality, if one were to relate to reality as though it were illusory, if one were to be a child of illusion, it might be hard to have an opinion. You know, it might be hard to, you know, take things that seriously, where one would want to stand firmly in some position, because it's just an illusory position. And so I'm kind of struggling with that a little bit when there are things happening, maybe things that are important, maybe things that kind of result in suffering for people, which is also some level illusory, right? How do you come forward in a way that is useful?
That is a perennial question. It keeps coming up. That's good. It's a good question. And, you know, we have the ultimate truth, and we have the relative truth that we talk about, and We also talk about how they're not separate, but they're kind of like two sides of a coin, or they are two things that we work with. But they're both, let's see. So we do experience suffering. It seems to be that if we truly and on an ongoing basis recognized the illusory nature of ourselves and others and all that we perceive, if we recognize that on an ongoing basis, we would not experience suffering. But if we're experiencing suffering, that is in the relative setting, context. And so we respond in that context. And if we observe others suffering, that experience of observing others suffering is something to meet with compassion and working to alleviate that suffering, again in the relative sense. But meanwhile, we do cultivate that illusory, that sense of the illusory nature. And at some point, I think that we work on those two at the same time, and at some point they come together, like when we're Buddhas. So it's not, it's not like one makes the other one. The our idea of treating everything as not real or illusory, that doesn't cut it. It's really the experience of it that will make a difference. But however they translated it, I don't know, be a child of illusion or whatever, that aphorism is meant, that's a practice. And so we practice it and try to soften our view of things as solid, our opinions, our everything, ourselves, our thoughts, our emotions, all of those things we can work at, viewing them more and more in that light, and it will make a difference. I think we might lose a few of our opinions that way. I think they might dissolve. But it doesn't mean that we don't address compassion or situations where compassion would be appropriate, or skillful activity of other sorts. I don't know. Does anybody want to add anything to that?
It's one of the elements in the relative practice is the practice of discernment. And it's actually easy for us to undermine our relative practice if we extend too much of an intellectual sense of all things are illusory. All opinions are illusory. All stories are illusory. Everything we tell ourselves is a fiction. And so they're all equal in terms of their fictional character. However, they're not all equal in terms of their impact in our lives and in the lives of others. So it makes a big difference how we use our discernment to actually understand situations. So from that point of view, not all stories are equal. Some stories that we tell ourselves will have more negative consequences, and some will have more positive consequences. So, and here we actually start to get into the realm of ethics. What are the consequences of actions? What are the consequences of holding certain views or opinions? And here it's it's an imprecise art. Unlike the ultimate, which the farther you go into it, it just seems like it's like a kind of a clean slice through everything. The relative is, we live in samsara is a very muddled place. But we have to make the best of it. It's a great story. Ozo Tenzin, who was Trungpa Rinpoche's main person, I think this must have happened right after Trungpa Rinpoche died. And Ozo Tenzin was with Dilgo Khyentse, and they were just sitting alone in a room. And Ozo Tenzin thought, here I am. Time with Dilgo Khyentse is a precious thing. I should ask something. I should do something here. And so he said, Khyentse Rinpoche, what is the meaning of the Dharma? And Khyentse Rinpoche said, to make the best of a bad situation. So that's the challenge. That's the challenge. So, and it's a very pithy thing when you actually look at it carefully. But it does require using discernment and doing our best, and then of course the teachings about all phenomena being illusory can help us open. They can help us open. But we have to do our best, and then have some humility about what the best brings.
I think it's interesting that they teach that when we really recognize the wisdom side, the emptiness, and illusory nature of things, that it causes us to have greater compassion than for other beings that we see that are not recognizing that and are therefore suffering greatly. And so it's interesting that by seeing the illusory nature, compassion can arise. And that's kind of feels almost contradictory, but it makes sense. And of course you have the Padmasambhava famous saying of, my view is as vast as the sky, so sort of have the view of emptiness, but my actions are as fine as sand, or whatever. I attend to my actions in as fine as sand. So the sense that there's still karma, as long as we're not complete Buddhas, we are in the world of karma, and that means there's suffering, and that means there's compassion, and that means there's loving kindness. And so these things, coexist.
Could you explain that a little bit, what you just said about Padmasambhava? What you said the view was
Is as
expansive.
vast as the sky? Is that what it is?
My view is as vast as the sky. My attention to karma is as fine as the grains of sand.
So when we talk about, the word view in Tibetan tradition is often associated with the ultimate. So view is, we hold the view of the illusory nature of things, of the empty nature of self and phenomena. And so he's saying his view, holding that kind of view, is as vast as the sky. So that means, I think that's just a metaphor, because there is a vastness to that, holding that view. And then, his attention to karma is as fine as the grains of sand. So that means very, very careful, very particular, very attentive to my actions of body, speech, and mind. That just both, so there's this open, vast, experience and outlook going on that's very free, you could say, and very, free and open. But within that doesn't mean that I abandon the sense of karma and ethics. Yeah. And he is said to be, practically a second Buddha. So if Padmasambhava said that, then we probably have to do that too.
My question is kind of about karma, or how we try to help people from a confused standpoint, or a deluded standpoint. And something that's talked about in some of the things I've read, or that we've discussed here, is that if you practice and gain some level of realization that your actions can free more beings, or they can be more effective in the manner in which they help, because you're not so coarsely deluded, perhaps. So I'm just curious about that. How is it that, that somebody could have this kind of minute action still in samsara, still with karma, but their actions could free more people? Like, how does that work? They're still living in samsara to some degree, but they're playing by that rule to some extent, but somehow their actions can still have a lot more impact.
Well, I don't know. I think even in an ordinary way, how much impact do you think the Dalai Lama has compared to me? He's thousands and thousands of people see him and are influenced by what he says. So that's even a living example today.
Yeah. My mind wants to go to like a kind of a devil's advocate place, which
Okay.
I don't think is always good. Hardly ever good. But, maybe part of my confused self goes, well, that's a part of a tradition, and he's found himself in that role in one sense because he's been reincarnated in that role, but also because of this institution. And you could say similar things about people who, don't come maybe from such an enlightened perspective, as they find themselves in a position of influencing a lot of people by the nature of their rebirth. And, so on the deluded side of things too, people have plenty of influence, just by nature of their position.
Yeah. But not necessarily good influence. I think we're talking about good influence, right? Benefit to people, beings. I think we've had some, maybe I guess I'm not familiar with all the Dalai Lamas, but anyway, we've definitely had some reincarnations that were kind of duds, that didn't really didn't really make much use of their position that they inherited or were bestowed upon them, and yet it really didn't really turn out that well or that amazingly. And of course, from Buddhist point of view, we are saying we would say the Dalai Lama didn't just get born this life. He's been working for a long time to get to where he is. And so, the path is beyond these lives, and if somebody got a position, karmically, that's what happened. He ends up with a position that allows him to benefit more beings. That's just more argument for like, that was a good move, to be born in a position where you really could, that could enhance your ability to help others. So I feel like those things, we can see it in, just people. And don't you feel like even in, I don't know, I meet people like a tour guide somewhere that somehow is so much better than other ones, that they say things that somehow transcend what their work is, and they impact me in, personally in some way that all these other ones didn't. And so people are, I feel like people do seem to have different abilities to benefit others, and there must be causes and conditions that led to that.
Yeah,
from the past.
Internally, I'm almost kind of answering my own question, I guess. My answer to my own question, I guess, is that I feel like what causes that to be possible is their bodhicitta, or their level of bodhicitta, like their level of aspiration to, selflessly serve other sentient beings. That aspiration or that wish is stronger and is being reinforced. But thank you for helping me find that.
Yeah. I think that would be what we would say. From a Buddhist point of view, that's what it would be.
Each one of us has a different mission. So you have to work on certain things. And they might not be evident towards the rest of the world. But as long as you work on them and you transform those, I think that brings benefit to the rest of the world without having to be in a position that you see everybody there.
And they do, we are taught that a key to getting to that place of being of greater benefit is aspiring to it. Exactly what you say is cultivating bodhicitta and that wish. And they say if you start wishing that, no matter where you are now or what you're doing, that is, it's like, I'm going to go to New York. That's the first step to getting to New York. If you don't ever think about New York, you probably won't end up there.
And they also say something to the effect that if you have good, normal, worldly intentions, and then they have a immediate effect, they have a temporary effect, but bodhicitta, that aspiration has karma that lasts, it goes on and on and on and on, and doesn't necessarily, you may have other thoughts and things that are obscurations or whatever, but that bodhicitta, the karma from one instant of that continues on and on and on, rather than a worldly desire to I want a hamburger or something, that's good, or I want to, I don't know, something, I guess you could say that's just more kind of the run-of-the-mill, you identify that as good, but it's not a bodhicitta kind of aspiration. The karma of that, or that the benefit of that is temporary, and the bodhicitta kind of continues throughout.
Mm-hmm. And that's, they would say that, and I have no way of totally verifying that, but it kind of makes sense I mean, when I think about, if I give somebody food, it's just definitely going to have a short-term impact, And yet, sort of the mental states that we work on and create, they do propel forward in a more lasting way, seems like. And habits, the power of habit, basically. So if we have a habit to wish for benefit, then I think habits, I can see how those continue.
A more personal question, but in meditation lately, it seems my thoughts are settling down, but what's really ramping up is all these sounds. Oh my God, like not ringing in the ears, but maybe something similar, like sine waves or all kinds of wild sounds. And is that normal?
Are you hearing that at home as well as here?
All over.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure it wasn't environmental. I was hearing things tonight, I don't know, in the fans or something.
It feels like it's more like it's from inside or the universe. I don't know.
Well, a lot of things happen. We become aware of a lot of different things, and a lot of things come up and appear and, come and go. Does it bother you? Or it's just interesting?
It gets kind of loud, and it feels.
It feels sometimes as distracting as lots of thoughts, like this weird symphony of vibrational noises. But I guess just kind of keep going and.
I think keep going. Do you put extra attention on it, or do you just let it be and keep your attention on? Are you using an object in your meditation?
The breath, but I'm also just trying to watch the sounds and not get too caught up in them. Just kind of say, oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. I think that works. I think if something starts taking on, if you put attention on something that then starts getting, well, this can happen too with, let's say, we talk about if you have a pain or something, you can meditate on that. But it's also true, what I find is that if it's a very difficult pain, that sometimes putting attention gives it more energy and more intensity, and that can be not necessarily helpful. So in those cases, like little pains are better than big pains, maybe for meditation, at least, maybe depending what stage we're at. But if you, anyway, when I have something that seems too big, then giving it more space by either paying attention mainly to another object, paying attention to the breath and letting the pain be there, sometimes seems a better way to go. So something that's kind of strangely distracting could be that too. Just use a different object which doesn't mean suppressing it or ignoring it totally, but maybe not giving it extra attention. Yeah.
I don't know if this will help or not, but I can relate. Had a similar experience, but with vision. Like when I was first meditating, or at some period in learning to meditate, like my field of vision would shift, or would feel like things were kind of warping or swirling or something, you know. And isn't that strange? Why is it doing that? You know. And I guess what I was finding, I think in retrospect, is that like once your mind starts to slow down, or you don't have so many coarse, disruptive thoughts, your attention also gets kind of finer, or something happens with your attention where your mind slows down and you're aware of things you weren't. I guess your awareness kind of expands in some way. I don't know, but regardless, what helped me was to not give it special import. Like what you're saying, you know, is to not say that it's, you know, a sign of development or a sign of progress,
or disaster,
or any
either one,
anything in between. It's just like, you know, something that's occurring, just like anything else. Right?
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Yeah.
There's a question I've been waiting to ask you, Dora, because of your expertise on the Paramita. You pronounce it two ways in your class, so I'm...
Oh, yeah, because you listened to my class where I had, right, online?
Yes, and
where I had looked up the pronunciation online, Paramita. Paramita. I never say that because no one else does, but I did in the class because I thought it was cool.
No, I can't do either one. It seemed like the first four are very understandable, and they seemed like they're in a category all their own because of they're basically things you would enact, like patience, or that you would embody. But it seems like I can't make a distinction between prajna and dhyana and shamatha and vipassana. They seem, in my mind, that they become the same thing, just in a different context. But is there a basic way that I would understand the distinction between those pairs and their different contexts?
I think what they're getting at is, so the one sometimes the fifth one sometimes translated as concentration, which we would call shamatha, and that's a cultivation of meditative stability. And so ability, which is what we're doing in shamatha, is training our mind to have better and better continuity of attention. But when we then apply that attention to the mind itself and to the nature of things, and we begin to recognize the actual nature, then I think we move into the sixth one, the wisdom. So more the fruition, in a way, of our practice that is more at the level of recognizing the way things are.
So would that be basically, you're saying that you could equate vipassana and prajna in those contexts?
Well, vipassana, I think we would say that that's a method. That's a method. And then the fruit of that is recognizing the empty nature of self and phenomena, self, other, and phenomena. So the method, I don't know, did I say it was in the fifth? I don't remember. But the method is one thing, but the actual realization that we would call wisdom in the sixth paramita is more of a fruit. We still, I guess we're still in all the paramitas. We're working on them, so I guess we're working to cultivate that wisdom, but it's a little different than simply being able. It's like the shamatha, even in the highest, ability, degree of ability with it, we're just being able to make the mind ready, make the mind in a place that can do this further practice that results in actual realization. So it's a awesome. I feel like they had some example of concentration where it's like a candle in a cave that has no wind. It's like totally. You can totally master this steady attention, but not recognize the nature of your mind. Theoretically, at least.
This is the last question then. If this shamatha, this concentration, is so perfect that the candle is not flickering in the cave, and at that moment, the insight arises?
Well,
on its own?
It's an interesting question. Sometimes we talk about, probably in different traditions of Buddhism, definitely in different traditions of Buddhism, they have different ways that they go about it. In the Tibetan tradition, we talk about cultivating shamatha, and then we talk about insight practice, which is where it's certain methods that we use to bring questions into our meditation. So, for instance, if you can sit with your best shamatha, and then you ask yourself the question, where is my still mind? Where is my mind? Does it have a boundary? Does it have a location? Is it inside me? Is it outside? If so, how far out? Etc. So that's a method. And when we ask those questions, we don't say, okay, got the answer, write it down. We look, and we may experience something that would be like insight. And so in our tradition, we need the shamatha to be able to use those methods, and then we use those methods, which on a good day may trigger an insight, and then we keep doing it, and we keep doing it to try to make that insight more stable. And so, of course, too, the more stable our shamatha is, the more stable our insight could be. And once we start having those insights, we're more interested in having our shamatha be stable, because it's very interesting to have those little glimpses. And we want it to be longer, and we want it to happen more. And what they say in our tradition is, in the end, a very stable insight. So the coming together of the shamatha and the insight in a more continuous way, that is Mahamudra. And so basically, that becomes basically enlightenment as it's more fully stabilized. So you can imagine that, well, the traditions that don't use our vipassana techniques, they probably get enlightened too. And so some of them, it might even just be by sitting. Maybe they have instructions that are pretty close to our shamatha instructions, but by sitting long enough, it probably just happens that insight comes. I would imagine that without using our methods of asking questions. Or maybe, you get hit with a stick or whatever they do in the other, which is just to say, I don't know how it works in some of the other traditions. But I'm sure that they have ways that lead to the same place. But just from our point of view, it's kind of the way I describe. Yeah. Yeah, so meditation is big. I mean, the 3 trainings also has, the category of ethics, and then it has this kind of concentration and wisdom. So the ethics, I think, includes everything, all the loving kindness and compassion and all the other things we do, and then there's the concentration, and then there's the wisdom. But they definitely aid and abet each other. Yeah, there's ongoing discussions as to, well, how much shamatha do you need before you try to work with insight? And, there's some people who say you should really, really, really try to get your shamatha really, really good. And then there's others who say, well, work with what you've got and, start doing insight earlier. And as I said, for me, the argument that working a little with insight can be inspirational to working on our shamatha, that's an argument for starting to work with it earlier. Although it can also be that you're just totally frustrated trying to apply those methods if there isn't enough stability.
I don't have another question, Dora. I just want to thank you very much for coming and for teaching tonight and being here with us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I wanted to help Zopa out, but I thank you for coming tonight and helping me meditate and practice. So, mutual benefit. Well, I think we could end 5 minutes early, have an eclipse break. Virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state. Ching.